Alaska harvests 600 million board feet of Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and other trees each year. Timber harvesting, sawmill, and paper pulp operations provide some 3,500 jobs for Alaskans.
The global timber industry is worth around $626 billion and employs around 33 million people globally. Covering over nearly 1/3 of the Earth's land surface, it's also one of the most abundant natural resources on Earth. There are over 60,000 known tree species, of which between 3 and 4,000 we use for construction, energy production, and paper and packaging. But it comes at a cost. Every year, around 26,000 square kilometers of forest are lost for timber production. That's almost the size of Albania and as much as 2.6 billion trees. But this resource is also a flashpoint for the growing challenges the world is facing. Because the industry is only getting bigger. But where did this obsession with wood start? And what is it made from?
The plant's main axis, or stem, is a conducting system that permits fluids containing raw materials and food to flow throughout the plant.
Wood is made up of the trunk and the stem and the branches of trees, and it is made up of 50% carbon and also some oxygen and hydrogen.
Almost all of it is composed of tubular cells which run up from the bottom of the tree up to the top of the tree. And those cells are used to pipe water from the ground up to the tree.
And it provides supporting tissues in the plant.
These cellulose and hemicellulose cells form the fibers of wood, allowing the complex structure to grow both vertically and radially.
They go parallel to the grain, as we call it. Now, the great benefit of that is that the tree is very resistant to bending because those structures resist being stretched and they also resist being compressed. And so it's absolutely ideal for the purposes that we use it for, structural timbers and all sorts of engineering purposes as well.
The composition and density of these cells and fibers give wood the differing properties, flexibility, hardness, resonance, that makes it very useful.
Not all trees are the same, of course. Some trees have got large, thin-walled cells, so that makes very light wood. They tend to be pulped and used for making paper. A tree with sort of medium-density wood, those sorts of woods are used for structural materials, beams, making houses, all the things we're familiar with. And some other trees are very slow-growing, have very dense timber, so it's very resistant to decay and lasts very long. They are used for specialist purposes, for producing beautiful furniture.
Our love for wood is deeply ingrained because humans and humanity have evolved amongst trees.
Trees and wood are basically why we're here at all. And that's because our ancestors and our relatives, the primates, they live in a wooden world up in the forest canopy. And we retain lots of their features: grasping hands, binocular eyesight. All of those we inherited from our primate ancestors.
Today, we see our closest relatives, chimpanzees, using wood ingeniously for termite fishing, possibly reflecting our own early tool use.
6 million years ago, when we came down from the trees, we didn't ignore wood, we took the wood with us.
The evolution of humans from our ancient primate ancestors has been closely linked to the use of tools. It is thought that dexterity of our hands, for example, are an evolutionary response to our craftsmanship.
When we started to use stone tools, we used those stone tools largely to carve wood, to make better shelters, to make better tools. So our whole evolution, right up to the start of farming, was all down to our ability to use wood. We used wood to heat up clay to make ceramics. We used wood to heat up other materials to make glass. And we used charcoal, which is a modified form of wood, to smelt metals, firstly bronze and then iron. And the great benefit of those metals was we could have precise carpentry. And with that carpentry, we started using wood to make more sort of advanced materials.
Around 5,500 years ago, the wheel began to appear in southern Mesopotamia, what is today modern-day Iraq. This region has long been thought to be one of the birthplaces of civilization. At this time, humans settled down from their hunter-harvester lives to begin farming. The invention of the wooden wheel and axle helped mechanize farming, which in turn helped support larger populations.
At the start of farming, what we had to do was to cut down a lot of those trees, open up areas. Now, the benefits of that, we could use some of that wood for our tools, for our buildings.
Today, much of the world has turned away from wood as our main construction material. But one nation continues its long and storied history of using precise carpentry to create beautiful wooden buildings. Nara, Japan is steeped in rich religious and cultural heritage dating back thousands of years. Here you can find some of the oldest and largest wooden structures in the world.
Japan has a really long history of using wood and making wooden buildings. And the reasons are partly that Japan is a very mountainous country, so there's plenty of wood for them to use. Even more important is that Japan is continually subjected to very strong earthquakes.
News from Japan is news of the recent disaster caused by earthquake and tidal wave. Many people lost their lives, many more were injured, and not much of value survived.
The unstable ground has led the Japanese to develop clever and sophisticated carpentry techniques.
The Zambo sashi, for instance, involves 3 or more pieces of wood joining at right angles. They don't use any screws, they don't use any nails to stick their buildings together. They just have these nice loose joints, which are strong but are still flexible, allowing their houses to sway in earthquakes and to survive even fantastically large shocks.
Japanese joinery does not involve glue, but rather is cut into puzzle-like pieces that are pinned together so that if any part of a piece of furniture or a temple needs to be replaced, that area can be unbuilt with just that portion being remade.
Even now, after thousands of years, wood remains Japan's preferred material for construction. 58% of all Japanese residential structures are composed mostly of wood.
People are only just beginning to understand the benefits of Japanese architecture. People are using those sorts of techniques in modern buildings to allow them to be resistant to earthquakes.
It's this resilience, adaptability, and longevity of wood that underscores its vital role in the expansion of civilization across the globe.
There's no doubt that wood has been totally fundamental in helping us to settle all around the globe. Probably the first vessels that humans used would be rafts. Then, over the years, humans started to develop more sophisticated craft. They dug out the wood from the center of trunks of trees to build dugout canoes. But the big change occurred at the start of the Bronze Age, where people were able to make precise carpentry and to make huge plank ships, and that led to the development of the first empires.
They traveled farther than any other sailors of their time as they fared to their adventures of commerce and war.
From Easter Island to Iceland, seafaring cultures have used wood to settle, explore, trade, and conquer. And in many cases, the rush for wood was the driving force behind it. None more so than the United Kingdom.
So it's fair to say that from the 16th century, when Henry VIII started to build up the English navy, as it then was, to the beginning of the 19th century, wooden ships were essential for Britain's power.
Britain's wooden walls, as the British Royal Navy has been dubbed, required a huge supply of wood. By the late 18th century, Britain was importing 50,000 loads of oak from the Baltic for their shipyards per year. A 100-gun ship required 4,000 oak trees to build. That's the equivalent of 40 football pitches of forest.
There's always been a huge trade of wood from the Baltic states, Scandinavia, and the western bounds of Russia. Where we didn't have the supply was in the gigantic masts those ships needed to support their sails.
Fortunately, there was a ready supply of the perfect lumber across the Atlantic in Britain's North American colonies. From almost as soon as colonization started, the logging and timber industry became one of the main exports of the new colonies to wood-hungry Europe.
The wood situation in Europe at the time was a bit impoverished because land had been cleared for agricultural use, and they needed to build their armadas to keep going with the colonial project. So when Europeans arrived in new lands, seeing all of the wood was extremely attractive.
There grew fantastic forests of gigantic white pine trees. Those white pine trees were just what the Royal Navy needed to act as their masts. We didn't have any of those left in Europe because we cut them all down.
In an attempt to control these trees, the British Royal Navy would sow the seeds of revolution in their new colonies.
They decided to make the big trees the personal property of the British Navy. That really annoyed the Americans. It was such a big bone of contention that it must have helped to start the American War of Independence. The Americans cut off the supply of masts, of course, during that war, and the British lacked their usual naval supremacy. And that's one of the major reasons why the British lost its American colonies.
North America's wood rush, which grew from Britain and Europe's demands, generated significant wealth that revolutionized the country's industry and drew a global workforce to its verdant forests. And to this day, it's a dangerous occupation, with some of the highest mortality rates in the US.
It has been historically quite a dangerous industry. When they're chainsawing down the tree, it's quite technical and complicated. It's not certain where the tree will fall. It will depend on the slope of the land and the canopy.
all sorts of things can go wrong. If you cut down some trees, the pre-stress in the wood actually causes the trees to split open and spring outwards and can kill.
Owing to its physically demanding and perilous nature, a folk hero emerged in North American culture, one who symbolized both the ruggedness and the adventurous spirit of the wilderness, the lumberjack.
These experienced lumbermen from the Dominion are doing a grand job.
In North America, the people who were involved in the wood industry have always been seen as heroic figures, frontiersmen.
In the early 20th century, nearly 500,000 rugged lumberjacks toiled the verdant, sprawling forests of the United States. Lumberjacks' reputations were built on strength, aggression, and hard work.
The lumberjack has to be extremely mighty and wields an axe or a saw and has to exert force against a sturdy, tall tree. Man conquers nature one tree at a time this way.
Eventually, the axe and saw were replaced by the chainsaw. Ox and carts were replaced by tractors and helicopters. And the famous river log drives were replaced by trucks.
We see large-scale machines, remotely controlled, huge chainsaw arms by an operator in a small vehicle box, cutting down trees in seconds and cutting down huge swaths. And that changes the romanticized notion of the lumberjack.
Today, both Canada and the US stand as global giants in the softwood lumber industry. Canada is the 4th largest producer of softwood lumber globally, producing over 155 million cubic meters annually. The Canadian industry employs about 178,000 people. The US is the world's largest softwood lumber producer, generating approximately 298 million cubic meters and employing more than 470,000 people.
There are two different sorts of trees, softwood trees, the conifers, and the broadleaf trees, which are also known as hardwoods.
Softwoods are actually conifers or pines or needle-leaf species, and hardwoods are actually broadleaf species or angiosperms, which means that they're flowering plants. And this has not really got anything to do with how dense the wood is, because, for example, there are some softwoods which are very, very dense and some hardwoods which are very soft.
Softwoods are by far the most commonly used type of wood, making up 80% of global timber production.
Softwoods tend to have a rather simple growth habit. They tend to grow very straight. That makes their wood very, very good for use for structural timbers. And so an awful lot of the construction uses softwoods from all the great boreal forests of Canada and Russia and Scandinavia.
The other major industrial application for softwood is as the primary source for pulp and paper, which accounts for as much as 15% of global wood consumption.
Almost half of Tasmania carries timber that can be used, and most of the production passes through the giant factory of Associated Pulp and Paper Mills. Chances are that the news you read today was printed on giant rolls of newsprint like these at the Burney Mills.
Paper is just a felt work of cellulose fibres, and you can press that to produce a nice flat sheet.
The leaves and the bark are separated, and then the timber gets turned into small wood chips of about 1 inch. And then these chips get put in big vats of boiling hot water.
Acid is added to the vats to help break down and remove the lignin, carbohydrates, resins and gums, leaving mostly cellulose fibres, which are then converted into pulp.
And then the pulp gets rolled out and turned into paper.
Paper was thought to have been invented in China about 2,000 years ago, before travelling to Europe via the Silk Road.
Paper has had amazing impacts on humanity because we are able to write down our thoughts, and rather than relying on the spoken word, documents can be transmitted across towns or villages.
The impact of this is hard to overstate. Without it, would any of us today have heard of the works of Shakespeare?
Without this book, the way we perceive literature would be completely different.
How would we know of the great leaps in science from the Enlightenment period?
And his writing is very small. Paper was expensive.
What would our modern world look like without copies of the Magna Carta or the US Bill of Rights? Interestingly, none of the paper these ideas were originally printed on was made from wood.
The things you used to throw away can live to fight another day. Large rags, small rags, the worn-out mat, stockings and trousers and last year's hat, tie them in a bundle just like that.
Most of that was produced by using cellulose from old rags, which is why people used to have rag and bone men come and collect your old clothing. That was fine until people started to have better literacy and we wanted to have more paper.
By the beginning of the 19th century, inventions like Louis Nicolas Robert's continuous paper-making machine enabled the mass production of paper. But increased demand had stretched the supply of rags with which to make paper to the limit. Shortages in some parts of the world were so acute that nations passed laws forbidding rags to be taken out of the country.
And it was at this stage in the 19th century that people realised you could actually make paper out of wood.
This was the beginning of paper's mass production.
It's much cheaper than making it out of rags. The price of newsprint went down. Books became cheaper. Literacy went up. People knew more about politics, and so one of the benefits of the paper trade is that gave us the birth of liberal democracy, where people could actually vote and know what they were voting for.
Part of the reason softwoods make such good pulp for paper is down to their cellular structure.
All their cells are the same, so that each cell has to both transport water up to the top of the trunk and it has to withstand forces. The broadleaf trees, or hardwoods, they have special cells called vessel cells, which are very wide, which are much better at conducting water. That means that a tree can grow much more rapidly.
This can help hardwoods cultivate denser, more durable fibres, often developing better weather resistance than their softwood counterparts. That makes them perfect for the things we use outside that are exposed to the elements, like decking and outdoor furniture.
Hardwoods, depending on the species, can have a whole range of uses. They're better for carving, they can have very high density and be used for things like musical instruments.
As a log carver, he chooses his wood with great care. This is a craft that demands not only skill, but a gentle strength in the carving.
I think we also appreciate wood on an aesthetic level. Researchers on the psychology of aesthetics have found that humans are attracted to patterns, and particularly patterns that have a balance between predictable and irregularity. The balance tends to hover at around 70% regular, 30% irregular. For example, looking at a checkerboard isn't going to hold anyone's interest for very long because it is 100% predictable. Wood grain falls into the magical realm of having a great balance between something predictable and something a bit irregular.
But beyond its visual splendor, wood also loves to sing a melodic tale that brings joy around the world. When wood is struck or vibrated, it resonates with a captivating timbre, and its natural structure either amplifies or absorbs sound waves, playing a dual role in the symphony of sounds.
A soft piece of pine's not going to sound like that.
And its natural structure either amplifies or absorbs sound waves, playing a dual role in the symphony of sounds. This attribute helped wood emerge as the quintessential material for crafting musical instruments, lending them not only superior sound quality, but also enduring beauty.
When it comes to making musical instruments out of wood, what you want is to have a material which is totally consistent. You don't want to have huge differences through the grain between the early wood and late wood of the grain. Nor do you want to have great big vessels which would interrupt the flow of the sound. So for that reason, there are two sorts of wood which are heavily used by musical instrument makers and which are known as tone wood.
Tone woods are specific wood varieties used in woodwind or acoustic instruments.
Firstly, you can have very dense woods, like ebony or blackwood. They are very good at transmitting sound, particularly high frequencies. So those are heavily used in woodwind instruments, like recorders and clarinets.
In stringed instruments, the soundboard resonates differently depending on the type of wood used. Instruments such as violins, some guitars, and pianos use softwood because it's lighter and less dense, which yields a warmer, more mellow tone.
The Stradivarius violins, which were made in the early 18th century, they're supposed to have a particularly brilliant sound. The wood is very lightweight and it's very consistent, and that makes the tone of those instruments extremely bright.
The enchanting symphony of sounds that emanates from wooden instruments owes its magic to the variety of tiny cells that form wood's very essence. The way these cellulose fibers are aligned within the wood is what allows sound energy to propagate along its grain. The growth in demand for wood products around the world has led to a devastating trade in illegally sourced timber.
One less hardwood tree in the rainforest of Papua New Guinea. For the logging company, part of a huge international operation. For local people, an encroachment on the harmony of their lives.
Over the past several centuries, a number of woods have surged in popularity and become very desirable for their perceived beauty and value. Some of these woods include mahogany, teak, rosewood, and ebony. access to these timbers, which are often in rainforest areas, has caused illegal logging and harvesting to occur.
Humanity's insatiable demand for timber goods for as cheap as possible inadvertently fuels a sprawling multi-billion-dollar empire across the globe.
Illegal logging is a big problem, and one that is very hard to prevent because there's an awful lot of people with very few options, very few jobs around. One of the things they can do is to log the forest. Of course, some illegal logging is actually done on a much larger scale, and that tends to be in areas with rather poor governance and large amounts of corruption.
Some illegal loggers have just felled a cedar. Chainsaw gangs like this wreak trails of devastation.
The UN Environment Programme reports illegal logging accounts for as much as 30% of the global timber trade. And it is as high as 90% of the trade from tropical countries. As a result, the program estimates the economic value of illegal logging around the world is over $100 billion US. It may lead to cheap furniture for consumers, but it comes at a much bigger cost to the economy and environment. The illegal industry has been accused of funding civil wars, organized crime, and money laundering. But when a single tree can represent financial survival in some parts of the world, it's a difficult problem to solve. Like in Brazil, the largest country in South America.
Claudio carries on with his daily routine of cutting down trees in the forest. He sees nothing wrong in what he does, and regardless of what environmentalists may believe, his conscience is clear.
Que necessita cortar madeira para comê-la, sustentar os filhos.
50 years ago, Brazil incentivized millions to colonize vast tracts of the Amazon. In the decades since then, about 480,000 square kilometers of Brazil's forest cover has been cleared. That's an area larger than Sweden. It's estimated that more than 850,000 kilometers of unofficial roads have been built in the Amazon to facilitate illegal activities like logging. That's the same distance as going around the Earth 21 times.
In order to counteract illegal logging, we obviously have to provide a counterforce to the economic drivers that are driving the people. The approach that's been taken by the UN RED programme seeks to give governments and local people extra money if they manage to conserve their own particular area of forest.
Its success will hinge on wealthy countries convincing Amazonians that money really can grow on trees and that they'd literally be better off leaving their forests intact.
Through RED+, developing countries receive funding for conserving areas of forest through carbon trading, where industrialized countries can offset their own emissions by transferring funds as carbon credits, or by investing through other mechanisms such as trust funds.
And now the idea behind RED is that, left untouched, this will be worth more standing up than it will be in a timber yard.
And the good news is those sorts of programs can actually be quite successful. Recent research has shown that sites on that RED program, they can have their logging reduced by about 45% and damaged by even greater amount by almost 60%. So providing local people with incentives to keep their forests can actually be pretty successful.
It's a massive undertaking, and if the protection of forested areas can be combined with reforestation efforts, wood's natural properties as a carbon sink could drastically help mitigate climate change.
So carbon sinks and carbon sequestration are excellent. The best process that we have evidence for this is photosynthesis, which is where plants will use the sun's energy to convert CO2 into carbohydrates and energy.
As the trees grow, they're drawing in carbon dioxide. For every kilogram of wood that's laid down, 1.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide is sequestered.
As long as the wood is a material, whether it's in a tree or if it's in construction material or furniture or art objects, as long as it's wood, the carbon is frozen into that wood.
It's a solution that improves the environment and could create a thriving economy at the same time, as has been recently realized in China.
China has undergone perhaps more deforestation almost than any other country, and that's because they have a huge population to support. That can be a problem because there's not enough supply of timber or wood. An even worse problem could be if there's soil erosion. In one part of China, the northeast, there was special soils called loess soils, which are very light, very fine dust.
After extensive deforestation on the Loess Plateau in northeast China, fine sediment has been building up in the Yellow River, exacerbating floods and causing massive dust storms that can choke Beijing.
What the Chinese have simply done in that northeast region is they've terraced some of the land to stop the water from removing the soil. So the reforestation is binding the soil together and preventing that soil loss. And that is starting to totally regreen that whole area of China.
As part of tackling their degraded environment, they committed to boosting forest coverage by around 6 billion cubic kilometers by 2030.
China has been instrumental in having perhaps the greatest regrowth of forests of anywhere in the world. They've been replanting throughout their regions, which has had benefits of improved tourism, improved biodiversity, to the re-emergence of wildlife. And in the last 20 years, that regrowth of forest has started to produce quite an impressive amount of storage and sequestration of carbon, and so that's helping to ameliorate and prevent at least some of the devastating aspects of climate change.
Between 2016 and 2021, 1.5 billion tourists visited Chinese national forests. This massive investment has helped lift 3 million people out of poverty and provided a huge boost to local tourism. But all these efforts around the world to reforest doesn't change the fact that there is still an ever-increasing and seemingly unsustainable rush for wood.
The construction industry is predicting a 12% growth in jobs over the next 6 years.
By 2037, the global construction industry is expected to grow by $4.2 trillion, all driven by urbanization, population changes, climate change, and the need for housing.
If we made most of our buildings out of wood, we would reduce a lot of the emissions from concrete and cement and reduce a lot of the emissions from building steel. That has been suggested that that could reduce global carbon output by something like 3%. So it's a small but really quite significant effect on reducing climate change.
I think a really exciting area is using timber products to replace steel and cement in construction. We're going to not only be absorbing carbon dioxide during the process, but storing embodied carbon in this construction.
As it stands, very few buildings are primarily made of wood, with the majority being constructed from concrete and steel. According to the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, if wood in new construction remains at the current level over the next 30 years, we could store approximately 10 million tons of carbon per year. But if we increase this usage to 90%, we could potentially sequester nearly 700 million tons of carbon annually. The world is taking notice. Nations like France have recently mandated that all new public buildings must be constructed with at least 50% wood. The challenge is that the strong structural properties of concrete and steel are difficult to match with wood.
One of the wonder materials today are the timber laminates that people are starting to use.
Will help to make timber as useful to the engineer as steel. That's the sort of thing they're saying about this new laminating process. After being covered in glue, the lengths of timber, with a finger joint at either end, are passed into a press to be bonded together by a pressure of 100 pounds per square inch. The process makes it possible to use up odd pieces of timber and make beams and joists of any length.
Although timber laminates have been around for some time, it's not been until recent technological advances in adhesives and high-precision machining that their structural properties have been able to rival more conventional building materials.
They don't use single beams of wood from a tree as they used to do. They're made by gluing together lots of small pieces of wood. You can attach the wood side to side, end to end, and that produces beams of any size. So you can have huge 80-meter long beams, for instance.
Hydraulic rams exert hundreds of thousands of pounds of pressure, simulating a devastating earthquake.
Now they're lighter than water, just like ordinary wood, and yet weight for weight, they're as strong as steel, they're as stiff as steel, and they're as tough as steel. And they use less than half of the carbon footprint.
These remarkable products are allowing for larger and larger wood construction, colloquially known as ply scrapers. And in the Swedish town of Skellefteå stands a shining example of modern construction, harmoniously blended with nature. Towering at 20 stories, the Sara Cultural Centre, also known as the Wood Hotel, is a hub of culture and art. Housing 2 theatres, a museum, an art gallery, and a library.
The lift shafts are entirely in wood, which is unique when it comes to a 20-story building.
Having this project being built, it showcases that it is possible to build this tall and complex in timber.
People and engineers have felt that timber buildings were incompatible with very tall skyscrapers. But we now have engineered timber products that enable us to overcome some of those limitations.
Glue-lam is basically gluing together pieces of wood like huge beams. So those can be made to use to support structures in skyscrapers. The other sort of wood is cross-laminate timbers, which is a bit like plywood, made with planks rather than thin sheets of wood.
Glue-lam is glued together with the grains running parallel. It boasts a higher load-bearing capacity than both steel and concrete relative to its weight, making it ideal for columns, beams, and various structural forms. CLT, on the other hand, is akin to supersized plywood, with each layer set at right angles to the next. This structure makes it strong in all directions, perfect for walls and floor slabs.
Both of those can make structures which are a fifth of the weight of an equivalent skyscraper made out of concrete. Wood is a fantastic insulating material because of all the small air pockets within the cells. So wood is typically 4 times better insulator than concrete and miles better than steel.
To put it in perspective, a 2.5 centimetre thick timber wall panel provides better thermal resistance than an 11.5 centimetre brick wall.
And there are wood, timber laboratories all over the world looking and searching for more innovative ways of using wood. And since we've carried on developing innovative ways of using wood throughout our evolutionary history, throughout civilization, throughout the Industrial Revolution, I see no reason why we can't carry on making even more use of wood and living in a fantastic wooden world.
A possible future we can all hope for. Every piece of wood tells an ancient story. Birthed from a seed that sprouted, grew, and thrived. Then transformed by human hands into a house, a book, a building, or art that we treasure for generations. Now, wood could even hold the key to our sustainable future. And so the next rush for wood will also be a rush for good.